What's up, everyone? This is Frank from Fam Sports New York. This is our Week 3 review. It's been a long day, so I know it's a little bit late, guys, but boy, what a weekend of football. There was a lot of big-time performances. So we got even some major upsets. Teams getting back on track, and there's a lot to say. Some teams really making a statement this past weekend. And, if you're new here, welcome again. This is our Patreon community getting our recap. We'll be running through the games, some of the analysis, in my opinion, when I watch some of them, some of the stats I'll give out to you guys. And our rankings are also going to be coming out for our higher tier members of our Patreon community. We're also going to be diving into offensive units and defensive units in those rankings as well. So, again, a lot to look forward to, guys. But let's start diving right into it because we got a lot of games. We got 29 games to kind of just address. Let's go over a couple A ones first. The first one I want to talk about Fox Lane at Brewster. Brewster won 7-0. This was a defensive slugfest. Fox Lane drops to 1-2. Brewster goes to 2-1. And when I look at Fox Lane, they had opportunities. They had opportunities at times. They did drive the ball, but they couldn't punch it in. The negative plays really hurt them. And again, Fox Lane now 0 points in the last two games. So offensively, they were able to run the ball earlier in the year, effectively making some big pass plays. Got to get to trying to get back to that with some more consistency. But the defense played relatively well until the end when it started to wear down a little bit. But when you look at Brewster, KJ Dillon throwing the touchdown pass, the only score of the game to Ficara on the receiving end. And Brewster really's emphasis on the offensive side of the ball is running the ball. And they actually kind of do is funny when you look at the NFL, when the Eagles, they get into short yard situation, kind of do this muddle huddle type where there's two running backs and they push the quarterback forward. Now in high school you can't do that, but Brewster kind of does a situation like that where they put two backs kind of in the A gaps and they're actually pushing the lineman and the quarterback is following that. So you're not allowed to push the runner in high school, but Brewster kind of does something like that where they're pushing the lineman and the running quarterback. And they kind of drove down the ball at times, just running that. And again, it's just like QB sneak, QB sneak, QB sneak. But they did enough offensively, and it really is, this defense that is really carrying things so far. It's been very strong. Lamaro at the linebacker spot, Carlson at the defensive line spot. They've made some big-time plays defensively. A little bit nervous about their offense overall, but it's gotten the job done, and they are at 2-1. Let's go to the next one. This is one of the biggest matchups to me. Was the game of the week. Harrison at Clarkstown South. Harrison winning 7-0. They go to 3-1. Clarkstown South now drops to 1-2. Big time win. This was another big defensive battle. Wasn't looking that way in the beginning, but I tell you what, they have some talented players on defense. I know Harrison's defense has been pretty strong. And not a lot of points scored, but there was a lot of the ball was moving, but again, turnovers are going to play a huge factor. Let's start with Harrison. Krupe had the big rushing touchdown. I actually thought he had a really solid game. He had a big pass deflect as well on fourth down, and it really relied, again, Harrison was moving the ball at times, but not consistently. It was the defense that really carried the day for them. They forced two INTs. I think it was three fourth down stops. Barcella did have 47 yards rushing. Quarterback Citro, only 36 yards passing and 9 yards rushing around. So not a big day from them. But this defense, Marco Marisi had a big INT. Dante Lanza had the INT to end the game on a pretty acrobatic INT. And this Harrison defense, they gave up some yards, but at big moments, especially near the red zone, they made some big-time plays to win this football game. And at the end, when they made a stop, they really ran the ball down and killed the clock for the most part. So the running game really did help at the end. But this defensive line caused a lot of pressure for Clarkstown South's offense. And they made some big-time plays. When you look at Clarkstown South offensively, the two turnovers really killed them. I mean, when you play these high-intense games and these two pretty much closely even matched teams, turnovers are the difference, right? And when you look at Clarkstown South's offense, they got to Harrison's 2-yard line, 13-yard line, 22-yard line, came away with 0 points, right? So 3 times pretty much getting into the red zone or close to the end zone and could not capitalize on it. And turnovers were a big reason for it. Just converting on fourth down was a big reason for it. We know about Butler. He's a big-time player for them. 80 yards rushing, 27 yards receiving, also led the team in tackles. He is the key cog on this. But when they got close to the goal line, they couldn't punch it in, tried throwing it at the end. It didn't work. The quarterback Holder, he was 13-23 for 78 yards, right? So, again, not a lot of yards. The 2 INTs were huge. Kyle Coughlin had 7 tackles. Clarkson South's defense played relatively well. At times, they did struggle on outside runs and off tackle runs, but they made enough plays to win this game. Tito had 4 catches for 37 yards. The defense only allowed 157 yards of offense, right? Usually, when you do that, you have a good chance to win, but the turnovers and the fourth down conversions absolutely killed them, and they're going to need to rebound next week. Let's go to the next game. There's an A matchup. Clarkstown North at Eastchester. Eastchester won 42-7. Eastchester goes to 3-1. Clarkstown North now 0-3. And I tell you, Eastchester is really starting to put together a couple very impressive victories. Quarterback Schultz again continues to be getting more and more efficient here. 8 of 13, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, also 79 yards rushing and a touchdown. Bruner had 54 yards rushing and a touchdown. McCloskey, one of the leading receivers there, he had 43 yards receiving and a touchdown. Tito, who's a big player for them defensively, also had a receiving touchdown. And Garba had a kick return touchdown. So you're seeing multiple guys contribute on the offensive end, which is kind of what Eastchester, it really revolves around Schultz, but then spreading things around for them. And defensively, that's really where this team, if they're going to make a run, is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. 7 points allowed. They've now put together a couple strong performances defensively. Eastchester has been pretty impressive. So they go to 3-1, and I think people are going to start recognizing them a little bit more. Let's go to a Big D matchup, one of the biggest rivalries in the area. Tuckahoe at Haldane. Haldane winning 21-13 to go to 3-0. Tuckahoe drops to 2-1. Huge victory for Haldane. Tuckahoe's kind of owned the last few matchups. We've had some really tight ones, but Tuckahoe always seemed to pull away, and Haldane gets the victory here. And Tuckahoe went up 7-0, and then Haldane scored 21 straight points. Tuckahoe then makes it close. Things are getting a little bit nervous, but Haldane holds on. And let's start with Tuckahoe. And they had 2 turnovers, which was 2 fumbles. Offensively, 244 yards. Not a high-powered offensive performance. Haldane's defense did a solid job. Their quarterback, Tuckahoe Colachicho, he had another impressive game to me. 15 of 32. The efficiency wasn't there throwing, but 178 yards, 2 touchdowns, also 55 yards rushing. He also had an INT on defense, so he was an impact player. Bryce had a receiving touchdown. Cypher had a receiving touchdown. But Haldane did a good job of limiting the rush attack, right? And that's a big thing, too. Tuckahoe was always very balanced. And outside of Colachicho, they didn't let up other players make big plays for them. So that's kind of the big thing. And for defensively, they gave up a lot of yards on the ground. And that's a big key. Haldane was able to control the football in this game. So when you look at Haldane, over 300 yards rushing. So, that's a huge part. They had 455 yards of total offense. So even though it only limited them to 21 points, a lot of yards, right? And Haldane controlled the ball for a while. Now, they also had 2 turnovers, Haldane, a fumble and an INT. But big kudos to their running back, Gianchinta. 185 yards rushing and a touchdown, also 53 yards receiving, so well over 200 yards. Also 6 tackles on defense. He's a big-time player, and you need those in these big rivalry games to make big-time plays, and he did. Quarterback Ryan Van Tassel, although didn't have a big game throwing the ball, had 93 yards passing, also had that INT, but 173 yards rushing. He was really effective on the ground, rushed very well, had 2 touchdowns. This defense, again, I mentioned, allowed only 244 yards of offense, 66 yards running, right? So they did a really good job of defending the run. Stubberfield is a guy who really was a huge impact player. We know about Gianchinta, but he also had 10 tackles out there. He was very active, and it was huge for this defense. Let's go to the next game, and it's an A matchup. Pelham at Greeley. Another very exciting game. Greeley ends up winning 24-21. They go to 2-2. Pelham drops to 0-3. Listen, that Pelham did at times drive the football, mix of the play action, rollout passes, quarterback runs. But again, the big plays have been hurting, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And when you look at Greeley, Osh had 2 passing touchdowns. One of them was at that last 2-minute with 2 minutes left to take the lead. Defense holds on just enough, and that was a big concern about Greeley is the turnovers. And again, turnovers are a huge thing. Greeley has turned the ball over too much and giving up big plays defensively, and the defense made enough plays in this one, and they come away with a huge victory to go to 2-2. This is a league game, so big victory at home. Big kudos to Greeley going to 2-2. Let's talk about a huge double-A matchup. And I know everyone was talking about the demise of Carmel. They went to John J. East Fishkill, and Carmel won 21-7. They go to 2-1. John J. East Fishkill drops to 3-1. This was a big league game. And I know after last week, Carmel, I hammered Carmel, and I think rightfully so because the defense did not play well at all. And I know they were going through a lot. They had some injured players, but they responded. So I was harsh on them last week. I'm going to give them major praise this week. They really stepped up, and it's kudos to the kids. It's kudos to the coaching staff. And the major response to me was on the defensive side of the ball. John Chase Fishkill was moving the ball and scoring a lot of points, but Carmel's defense had 4 sacks, 2 INTs, did a really good job of keeping the quarterback. East Fishkill likes to have these rollouts, design quarterback rollouts, and they did a good job of generating a lot of pressure. They really imposed their will up front. They had a size advantage, and they took advantage of that. Linebacker Risley was huge. He had 2 sacks. Forrester had 2 sacks, and they forced a couple INTs that Feliciano doesn't normally make. Connolly had an INT. Santiago had an INT. And when you look at the offensive side of the ball, I thought they would have success running the football, and that's exactly what they did. Had over 225 yards rushing, led by Worlou, who had 135 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Venables had 65 yards rushing and a touchdown. So dominated up front. And that's what Carmel did. They get back on track, and now they're back in the driver's seat, in my opinion, especially with a loss that North Rockland had as well that we'll talk about in a little bit. And when you look at East Fishkill, Feliciano, 14 of 23, had 189 yards passing, had a touchdown in INT. So, again, you look at those numbers, it's not too bad, but they put so much on him, and they really struggled running the ball. I mean, they had negative 33 yards, including the sacks, right, running the football. They couldn't run the ball. And, again, Feliciano couldn't, the running backs couldn't. The offensive line got overpowered by Carmel's front seven. Angliotti had the big receiving touchdown. He had 4 receptions, 65 yards. I thought Berg defensively was pretty active with 8 tackles. Calagnini had 7 tackles. Crouch had 6 tackles. I thought the defense played relatively enough. They did struggle to stop the run, that downhill rushing attack, and at times got beat to the outside. So this was a big test right here. Carmel gets back on track. East Fishkill now, how do they rebound from this against a big physical front like Carmel? Can East Fishkill show that they can play with bigger, stronger teams? Is a big question. Let's go to the next game. This is a B matchup. Sleepy Hollow at Lakeland. Lakeland won 46-20. Lakeland goes to 3-1. Sleepy Hollow goes to 1-3. Sleepy Hollow, no Richardson, which is a huge part of their team. Fink had a passing touchdown, also had an INT. And Bowen has obviously been the main horse in this offense. He had another 150 yards rushing and a touchdown. Mejia had a receiving touchdown. But when you look at Lakeland, Grady Leonard, he continues to perform at a very, very high level. I think he's been the best quarterback in B so far this year. He was 23 of 32, 454 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, also 29 yards rushing. He's been sensational, and he deserves a lot of praise from me. And they have a duo at the wide receiver spot, multiple guys, but the duo of Gallagher and Perry have been huge. I mean, Gallagher had 7 receptions, 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. Perry had 8 receptions, 167 yards and a touchdown. So those 2 guys combining for over 320 yards. Pretty crazy. Anthony Frabosi had 88 yards receiving and a touchdown. Paula Castro, the running back, and that's huge for Lakeland. If they can get a running game going to balance that pass attack, it puts a lot of pressure on your defense. He had 75 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. Defensively, they did give up some big rushing yards, so that is, again, they have to shore that up a little bit, but Ferroni had 6 tackles, Morales 5 tackles. Ferrante's been a guy now that's come up the last couple of weeks. He had 3 tackles and a sack, who's made some big plays for Lakeland's defense. Let's go to the next game. This is another big B matchup. Putnam Valley at Nanuet. Nanuet winning 14-0, another strong defensive game. And let's start with Putnam Valley. To me, it shows that, they can bump and grind with teams, and they just couldn't muster up enough offense, especially in the passing game. Meister had 84 yards rushing, which wasn't bad. It's almost 4 yards to carry. Cunningham passing the ball 1 for 8, right? So they couldn't get the ball throwing. Dobra was another quarter, 1 for 5 passing. So, 2 for 13. Couldn't generate enough plays on the offensive side of the ball in the passing game. Defensively, Jashaj, he was very, very active in this one. So he deserves a lot of kudos. 8 tackles, 2 sacks. Odin also had an impactful day defensively. But when you look at Nanuet, they responded very well to the loss last week, especially defensively, pitching the shutout. You had Evan Moran have a rushing touchdown. Colin Stemmerman have a rushing touchdown. But on the defensive side of the ball, they shored things up. They did not give up those big pass plays that they did the week prior. Shane O'Neill had 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. They forced 4 total turnovers. Gallagher had a fumble recovery. He was very active with 9 tackles. Miro had 2 INTs. So this defense really responded in a big-time fashion and a good response getting to 2-1 for Nanuet. Putt Valley also drops to 2-1. Let's talk about a big AA matchup. Mamaroneck at New Rochelle. Mamaroneck winning 21-7 on the road. Big impressive victory for Mamaroneck. It was 14-7 in the third. This was a back and forth game, a grinded out type of game, and a big kudos to this defense. And linebacker T.J. Smith has had a very strong start to the season defensively. He had close to 20 tackles in this game, including 60 yards on the offensive side of the ball. He's been big time for this team and this defense. Their quarterback, Mackey, another efficient day, 9 of 11 passing, 127 yards and 3 touchdowns, 87 yards rushing on the ground. He's gotten better and better. Ollie Smeal, he had two touchdown receptions. Friedman had the other receiving touchdown. But it's this defense. They limited big plays by Rochelle. They didn't give up those long outside runs. And that's why Mamaroneck went on the road and won in impressive fashion, going to 2-1. Let's go to the next game, a B matchup, Hen Hud at Nyack. And Nyack won 20-13, a much closer game than a lot of people anticipated. Hen Hud at one point was leading 13-12. Late in the fourth quarter, they were ready to pull off this upset. So this was a nice bounce back victory a bounce back game for Hen Hud. They can continue to show some of those improvements and especially at the quarterback spot, 5 for 9, 67 yards passing and a touchdown, also 43 yards rushing and a touchdown. He had a nice game. Gino Womack, he had the receiving touchdown, also made a big play defensively with the INT and 5 tackles. So, Pesky also very active defensively with 15 tackles. Sumter had a sack as well. So Nyack has a lot of skill guys who can make some big-time plays, and Heno did a good job defensively to limit those things. And when you look at Nyack, they started off a little bit slow, right, getting things going. They made enough plays in this one. Defense, I thought, did a pretty solid job overall. They did give up some big rush yards. Again, over 150 rush yards. So definitely want to shore those up. Ryan Cardahan had over 100 yards receiving, had that receiving touchdown. I believe it was at the end. So, again, for Nyack, consistency is a big one. You can't take games lightly. Henhood almost pulled the upset there, but Nyack makes enough plays at the end at home. Let's go to probably one of the biggest games of the weekend. Huge B matchup, Rye at Pleasantville. And this was one of the most anticipated games. And Pleasantville winning 21-12. Pleasantville goes to 3-0. Rye goes to 2-2. I was wrong on this pick. I picked Rye to go on the road and win. And let me just start with the losing team. So big kudos to Pleasantville. But let me start with Rye. And I got to say, they were missing around 8 starters. We don't get an injury report, so it's hard for me to know these kind of things beforehand. But they were missing guys like Shepard Griffiths, no Swarnak, no Kesner. Again, a bunch of big-time players for this team. But what I really like what I heard from both teams. It was a huge, grinded-out game. Pleasantville really dominated the second half. And both teams, I thought, said the right things afterwards. I mean, quarterback Miller, he didn't, say, hey, we're missing 8 starters. It's an excuse. He said there is no excuse. We had a good game plan. We didn't execute, and that's what happened. And I love that. That's leadership right there. I mean, I hate these moral kind of there's moral victories you can always take from a loss, things that you can build on, but you don't go in now publicly and say, hey, this excuse, well, we played this guy is the reason why we lost. It's, hey, you know what? We competed, we didn't execute, and I love that. And even on the other side, Pleasantville knows that, hey, Rye was not at full strength. We got to get better as well. This was a very important victory, but we got to get better as well. I love that from both teams. Really impressed by both sides. But talking about Rye and their game plan, I mean, it was obvious, right? They wanted to run the ball. I believe they had a size and strength advantage, and then some of that play action stuff, some of the quick stuff and some of the play action to go deeper was kind of the game plan offensively. Worked in the first half. Second half, you had opportunities, but turnovers were a huge one. And, again, you have, 4 turnovers? That's just not going to do it, especially 3 in the second half. So, that's the big issue. Turnovers were a killer for them. Defensively, I like the way they kind of played in Pleasantville. It was very unique. When Daniel Picard went out a wide receiver, they were at times playing 3-on-1 when he was a solo wide receiver, which I haven't really seen a lot. They were saying, screw letting Daniel Picard kill us as a receiver, right? So when he was in the backfield, you saw Rye bringing a lot of pressure. When he was out at wide, they had almost 3 guys over there. They were saying somebody else has to make a play for Pleasantville's offense. And that was the gamble, and they thought it worked for the majority of it. But Pleasantville did a good job of executing and getting the ball to other guys who made big plays. Quarterback Miller, 6 of 14, 95 yards. Again, not efficient. He definitely knows. To me, I know he's a much better player. He did have the 3 INTs, right? So to me, I know he's one of the best quarterbacks in the class. And this is probably, sometimes when you're forcing things because you want to make a big play, it ends up causing major issues. And they ran the ball relatively well. I like Luliano. He had 109 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, also had an INT. This offensive line at times was moving people in the running game. Jack Asavati had 3 receptions for 37 yards. Defensively, again, they were up 12-7 at one point, and then Pleasantville scored 14 unanswered, right? Defensively, they held up relatively well. Amir White had an INT. Andrew Wilmerth had an INT. They also forced 3 turnovers. Eventually, Daniel Picard, they held him in check for most of the times, had a long touchdown call back, and then he broke loose in kind of the Wildcat offense, scoring in the second half, which kind of put the nail in the coffin for them. But let's go to Pleasantville now, and they deserve a boatload of credit. Becoming the big dog coming down from A to B, wondering are you going to be the favorite anymore? And they made big time plays on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And it wasn't perfect. They were down 12-7. They were getting pushed around a little bit, but scoring 14 unanswered points in the second half. Defense, to me, it was 3 big reasons. We know about Daniel Picard. He's sensational. He's special. But to me, the big difference in this one, and there was 3 quick reasons for me. Number one, defensively in the second half, forcing 3 turnovers was absolutely huge. The secondary played big time. Secondly, the pass attack outside of Daniel Picard, getting the ball to other people is so important, and they executed and made big time plays. And finally, the kicking game. Sokic, he was 3 for 3 on extra points. Rye missed extra points, and that, again, if it's 21-13 or 21-14, it's a 1 possession game. Now it's a 2 possession game when he gets that extra point at the end. And that forces Rye that they have to start taking big shots as time's running out, ends up forcing an INT. So those are huge reasons for me. Daniel Picard had 96 yards rushing and a touchdown, also had a big INT on defense. But he didn't, again, he makes big time plays, but it was some of these other guys. Aiden Picard, he did have a couple INTs, which they have to clean up, but had a huge passing touchdown and rushing touchdown. Brian McPhee, he made a really nice read to him, throwing it over the middle. He makes a touchdown catch. And another guy, Eric Coleman, he was so important. When you go 3-on-1 on somebody, that means somebody's man-to-man. And Eric Coleman had over 100 yards receiving on 3 receptions, had a couple of huge ones. But this defense deserves a lot of credit. Sadow had an INT. Emmett McDermott had an INT. You mentioned about Daniel Picard. Ethan Berger had a sack. David Hudzinski had a fumble recovery. This defense really stepped things up. At times they were getting pushed around, but they bent, and didn't break and forced big-time turnovers and really dominated in the passing game. Pleasantville deserves a lot of credit going to 3-0. This was a game I watched from practically start to finish. Was a very enjoyable one. Let's go to the next one. Oh, and by the way, I don't think it's going to be the last time they see each other. Let's go to the next game. AA matchup, Arlington at Ketchum. Big time rivalry game, and Arlington really dominated. 49-0 winning this game. I was curious to see how Arlington was going to react after the huge victory last week. Well, they responded very well and efficiently. Resigno, 5-6 passing, 188 yards, 4 touchdowns. Also had an INT on defense. Quarterback Feldman also had a passing touchdown. 5 different receivers scored a touchdown in this one. Jaden Tuttle, one of those guys had the receiving touchdown and a pick 6. And Nick DeGusto, 47 yards rushing, also had a fumble recovery. Just a real dominant performance, also pitching that shutout. Both sides of the ball, absolutely dominant. Next game, AA matchup, Yonkers Brave at Scarsdale. Scarsdale winning 35-0. I'll tell you this, Scarsdale, this game was driven by Ryan Gilligan. He had a really sensational game. I think 3 rushing touchdowns, also a fumble recovery for a touchdown, a long one. So big-time performance by him. Max Eagle had that forced fumble. Trevor Knott made some big-time plays for them. And this team forced multiple turnovers. I mean, they forced, I think it was 3 turnovers. Camden Mantles had an INT. Mickey Vibert had an INT. Spencer Rosen at the quarterback spot also did a pretty solid job of his option game. So this was a dominant performance. The big question to me, Scarsdale is against bigger teams, but I tell you what, they can move. They're athletic. Pitching that shutout, the defense has performed pretty well these last couple weeks. They go to 2-1, by the way. Scarsdale and Yonkers Brave drops to 0-4. Let's go to a big-time A matchup. Mahopac at Somers in a league game, and Somers winning 28-14. They go to 3-1. Mahopac has now lost 2 straight. They go to 2-2. And Somers, I got to say this. Let's start with Mahopac. Okay, they were down 20-0 by the end of the third quarter. The defense forced 2 turnovers in this game. They bent a lot, but they didn't break. They had some 4th down stops. The defense, I think, kept them in the game for the most part. The offense struggled for a majority of it until like the 4th quarter, right? So then they had a passing touchdown to Carney. Carney also had an INT. Danny Koch had an INT. He also had a receiving touchdown on a nice throw by the end zone. But offensively, they just couldn't get any consistency for the majority of the game. The defense was holding for a good portion of it. But then Somers really revved it up. I thought they caught Somers a little bit lackadaisical in the beginning, but just not enough offense. And they've lost now 2 straight. Now we go to Somers, and I tell you what, this wasn't their prettiest game for whatever reason when they play Mapac. They're just not very efficient, at least early on. And offensively, I thought they had a very poor first half. Defensively, I thought they played very well for about 3.5 quarters, right? So, not their strongest performance, but I tell you what, good teams find a way to win when things are not clicking. And offensively in the first half, normally you see this offensive line dominant. They weren't as dominant as they weren't moving bodies, opening up a lot of holes. The running backs were a little bit hesitant running, so they had to throw a lot. They had to throw 19 times, and just the passing game wasn't clicking in the first half. And you say that they go up 20-0, right? So like you think that they're absolutely dominant. You got to learn, even in victories on some of the things. They got to start off faster. Now Sullivan ended up being 13 to 25 for 233 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also had a rushing touchdown. Really took things into his own hands. But again, only passed 6 times in the second half. He was 4 of 6. He was 9 for 19 in the first half, so not efficient, right? And they had the big turnover in the fourth quarter near the end zone, had another INT, so definitely not their best performance. But in the second half, this offensive line revved it up, and Sullivan not only was throwing, but he was running the ball, and that's where they really took control and controlled this game. Palazzolo is another guy who's made some big-time plays. He's becoming more and more of a star at the wideout spot. 7 catches, 177 yards, 2 touchdowns. Miguel Iglesias had a receiving touchdown off an RPO. Kelly started to run the ball better in the second half. He had 82 yards rushing. Defensively, I mentioned, this was a very strong defensive performance for a majority of the game. I thought they got a little bit lax in that fourth quarter, giving up some big chunk plays in the passing game. That was a bit uncharacteristic. But they had 2 INTs. Ryan Cole was very impactful. He had a sack, made a couple big-time plays on the defensive line spot. So Somers wins this game. They were up 20-0. Ends up being 28-14. Probably not their best performance when they go watch this on tape. So let's see how they, again, probably going to build on. I bet you they start off faster this upcoming week, but starting faster has got to be now a priority for them if they want to continue to grow. All right, let's go to the next game, Hudson Valley Football League game. Walter Panis at Spring Valley, a rematch of the Hudson Valley Football League Championship from last year. Spring Valley winning 14-6. And Spring Valley, again, offensively, it's a bit mixed. They had 2 passing touchdowns. They do just enough offensively because this defense puts a lot of pressure on you. They can get some big chunk plays offensively. Defensively, they forced another turnover. They had a fumble recovery. They're very aggressive. They're limiting big-time scores. Walter Panis kept this close. I mean, this is not a lot of high-power offense going, but defensively, you're seeing a lot of good activity, and these games get close to Spring Valley, and they pull away. They play good enough defense to win these football games. And now Spring Valley goes to 3-0. Walter Panis dealing with injuries. They're down to 0-4. So Spring Valley continues to play with really strong defense and aggressive play. Let's go to the next game, AA matchup, Mount Vernon at Suffern. Suffern winning 36-6. They go to 3-0 on the season. Mount Vernon drops to 1-2, and you look at Suffern starting at the quarterback spot. Palumbo, 9-16 passing, 105 yards and a touchdown. But Jeff Joseph, he is the guy who's been really the engine. He's had a couple big-time games. He had a big-time game versus Nershell. This game, 223 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Big-time player for them. Brady Snell had 5 catches, 66 yards and a touchdown. Cam Liu is another. He's a slot receiver, had a big-time kick return for a touchdown. And this offensive line continues to impress, opening up holes over 250 yards rushing. This offensive line has been really tremendous. It's one of their biggest, I think, perks and surprises, I think, on the season. And defensively, 6 points allowed again. This is a defense that has been rallying. A couple games now, this defense has been very impressive. See if they can continue. They go to 3-0. A couple impressive games put together. Let's go to the next one. Probably the biggest upset of the week. AA matchup, Ossining at North Rockland, and Ossining winning 29-14. Big kudos to Ossining. Let's start with them. Their ability to run the football. Anthony LaFaro, 200 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns on 35 carries. He really was the workhorse and the engine of this team winning this football game. Sebastian Lopez had a big field goal at 38 yards. This offensive line also deserves a lot of credit. Michael Furman kind of leading the charge there on that O-line, but really strong performance by this offensive line, the ability to run the football. Aiden Moore and Martin Weedles was strong on that defensive front as well. They forced, I think, 6 Turnovers. I mean, that's the recipe to pull off these kind of upsets, forcing turnovers, running the football, making some big plays, and that's what they did. Honestly, this was a huge victory on the road to go to 1-3, and North Rockland dropping to 3-1. And when you look at North Rockland, the offense again has been very mixed. 260 yards of offense, not too bad, but 5 fumbles, 5 fumbles. They also threw an INT. Jamie Savoy had 2 rushing touchdowns, and Anthony Hamilton 12-15 passing for 200 yards, but the turnovers, the fumbles, they're absolute killers. Absolute killers. And North Rockland struggled to stop the run. And with all these, again, change of possessions, Ethan Farrar, he had a really strong game. 7 receptions for 154 yards, also 12 tackles. Tristan Vade, another 15 tackles and a fumble recovery. But too much to overcome for North Rockland. Were they looking ahead? Just sloppy turnovers really killed this team. So that's a tough one for them. All right, let's go to the next one. This was a nice C versus Hudson Valley Football League matchup. Tappan Zee at Westlake. Westlake winning 46-16. Westlake goes to 2-0. Tappan Zee goes to 2-1. And I'm going to focus in again. Tappan Zee coming from the Hudson Valley Football League. I think they're probably one of their strongest teams. They were able to show them move the ball, but Westlake has they really dominated up front, and that's kind of the story on this. And when you look at Westlake, that offensive line and tight end group really was impressive, and now we've seen 2 strong games from them. Even when penalties and stuff like that, I thought they had a really strong game in this one, and you could see the potential. Guys like Maxwell Mealy, Scapelhorn, Leiden. There's multiple guys here that they filter in at that offensive line and tight end spot, and you saw their dominance in this one. And I apologize if I mispronounced names, but not very great with names. But another guy to keep in mind is CJ Prosperino. Tight end, he had his touchdown reception, also had a pick 6 on the defensive side of the ball. He was an impact player for them. Callie had a touchdown run. Zino had 2 rushing touchdowns. Archiello had a rushing touchdown. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then quarterback Pagan had a passing and rushing touchdown. 5 different guys who scored a touchdown. So Westlake has multiple guys who can make plays for their team. And to me, what was really impressive, that offensive line, defensive line, with that kind of mixture there, they could be a very deadly force. Now, they did give up some big plays on offense, no question, but they forced turnovers and dominated in the trenches, which was impressive. Let's go to the next game. This is a C matchup. Woodlands at Valhalla. Valhalla wins 35-8. Valhalla goes to 2-1. Woodlands is down to 0-2. Woodlands, again, passing the ball, 10 of 13 passing for a touchdown by Masai Campbell. Also had an interception. Jaden Roberts had that receiving touchdown. Jake Castile is, again, I talked about him in the team previews. 8 tackles, a sack, 2 forced fumbles. Impact player, and Lockie with also 6 tackles. But Valhalla really dominated early. I mean, they dominated right from the get-go. It was 20-0 at the end of the first quarter, 35-0 at the half. Just a dominant performance on both sides of the ball. They put a lot of pressure on you. This is a tough, gritty football team that can run the football. They can do some play-action pass. But I was impressed with their defense, and now we've seen, again, Valhalla getting to 2-1 has been pretty damn impressive these last few weeks to start the season. Let's go to the next game, AA matchup. Yonkers Forest was 2-1, at White Plains, who was 0-2. They end up winning 28-20, going to 3-1. And again, when you look at Yonkers Forest, this double quarterback system, Nazir Field had a strong day running the football, 88 yards passing, but 153 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. One of them passing, one of them rushing. Angel Aquino, we know about him. He also had a very explosive day, over 120 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. Big play guy. Corey Everett, not a big performance this week, but 37 yards rushing and a touchdown. Valerio was 4 of 7 passing, 56 yards and a touchdown. But I like how they have multiple guys. Everett was a guy who was keep having big games. Aquino had a big game on this one, and their quarterback Fields running the ball. So you're seeing Yonkers Forest is also starting the season 3-1 is a big time. It's huge for that program. Starting 3-1. So really impressive performance by them. They deserve a lot of kudos. Huge A matchup. John Jay Cross River at Yorktown. Big time rivalry in the Class A. Yorktown won 42-0. Yorktown absolutely dominating. John Jay Cross River offense has been struggling these last couple games and trying to get some consistency defensively. They have a lot of speed, but again, stopping the run against bigger physical teams is the big question mark, and Yorktown had a lot of success. They defended the pass relatively well, Cross River, but when you look at Yorktown, quarterback Gonzalez, again, 5 of 11, 34 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? He had the big touchdown, but it wasn't a huge passing performance because they were running the ball. And Delvecchio, another over 100-yard performance and 2 touchdowns. Constantine had 35 yards rushing. Kane had the 2 receiving touchdowns, only 12 yards, but 2 touchdowns. That's a nice ratio there. I mentioned Constantine, but it's this defense that has been really impressive. Pitching the shutout. Constantine had that INT. Ryan Vogel has now been super active the last couple of weeks. 8 tackles and an INT. Connor Duncan had a big-time sack. Jack Ferrone had 6 tackles. Matt Cicinelli, he had a sack. This is a defense that gets really after you. And I tell you what, I don't think Yorktown, the people are starting to recognize them as a legit threat. Talked about them at the start of the season. I thought this team can make some noise. And they start off the season 4-0 with a huge, emphatic win. They beat Mapac. Now they come out, shut out Cross River. It's been a strong couple weeks for Yorktown. Next B matchup, Albertus Magnus at Briarcliff Hamilton football program. Albertus Magnus winning 7-6. So Albertus Magnus again isn't in the independent league, or they're an independent team. So I don't really cover them, but a really nice victory. First win for their new head coach there. Briarcliff Hamilton football just couldn't get muster enough offense. Defense played pretty well, but losing 7-6 is a tough one. Let's talk about a C matchup, huge C matchup. Dobbs Ferry at Bronxville, and Dobbs Ferry winning 12-7 on the road. This was a rainy, ugly game, and that's the kind of game Dobbs Ferry wants to play. And Dobbs Ferry really won with their speed and defense. Offensively, 325 yards, pretty solid. The offensive line, although not big, they're strong, and they really got out on the edge on Bronxville. They really got out on the edge. They used their speed to get to the outside. Hartnett had 2 passing touchdowns off of play action. That worked very well. One of them to Messeri for a touchdown reception. Drexel Lewis also had a receiving touchdown. Running back Holman, 147 yards rushing. I thought this was a really outstanding performance by him. He really showcased himself out there as a dominant performer that could be for this team. Defensively, though, is where things really shine. Patrick McGovey had an INT. Marty O'Leary, I thought he had a really strong game on both sides of the football, leading the way, again, at the offensive center spot and at the linebacker spot, 8 tackles. Messeri also had a fumble recovery. He was active defensively. This was an impressive victory for Dobbs Ferry, although there wasn't a lot of points. They moved the ball, and they hurt themselves at times in some big moments, but really good job defensively, limiting Bronxville, running the football for the most part, and their ability to run the ball. Bronxville, again, starting off slow, and that's been kind of the big thing. They've been dealing with some injuries as well, so definitely don't want to discredit that, but they've just been starting off so slow. They were down 12-0 again, coming back, had an opportunity to maybe take the lead. Brian Formato is a young football player. He was really a spark for them in the second half, had 62 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown. Davis Patterson, we know for the last couple of weeks, had 61 yards rushing. It was an ugly game. It was hard to pass the ball consistently. A lot of penalties offensively, 172 yards on the offense. So not a lot. Wyatt Grafter, had an INT. So Bronxville, I thought, played good enough defense. They're missing some key guys, but just not enough offense. Let's talk about another B matchup. Ardsley at Byram Hills is a nice little rivalry game. Ardsley winning 27-9. And their quarterback, Rendy, not a big performance throwing the ball. Only had 3 completions, but over 200 yards of total offense. He ran the ball a lot, 23 carries. Ben Silverman also 59 yards rushing. Riper had a rushing touchdown. This offensive line performed very well against Byram Hills, who at times can struggle versus the run, and Ardsley tried to take advantage of that, and they did a good job. Parker had 2 field goals, and defensively they forced turnovers. That was a big thing for them, so they were forcing a bunch of turnovers. That's what's really killing Byram Hills, right? It's the turnovers. Quarterback Accurso, 12 of 25 for 131 yards, 3 INTs, right? So that has been an absolute killer for them and stopping the run. So those 2 things that reared its ugly head again in this one. Burfield had a touchdown run. Weiler had a huge 51-yard field goal. Super impressive. That was a college kick right there, and he drilled one through. But Ardsley goes to 3-0. Byram Hill goes to 1-2. So about another B matchup, Edgemont at Croton Harmon. Edgemont winning. This was another very good game in the rain, ugly game, winning 24-19. Let's start with the winning team in Edgemont. David Larson had 2 rushing touchdowns. Joey Sato had a very impressive performance, 149 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So they were really able to run the ball. Joe Siegel had an INT. Wesley Cooker had 8 tackles. A couple impressive performances. Croton Harmon, they struggled to stop the run. They were getting run on. Jacob Jones had a rushing touchdown. Orlando Gomez had a big INT. Smitwich had 2 rushing touchdowns. Ben Reed was also very active, but struggling to stop the run. This game was close, going back and forth. Croton Harmon was crawling back into driving the ball, but at the end, Edgemont made the big plays. They go to 1-1. Croton Harmon falls to 1-2. Another big B matchup, Pearl River at Hastings. Pearl River winning impressively 31-7. They go to 2-1. And I was focusing on them. Dagon McLaughlin, another receiving touchdown. This one from Jack Whalen, their quarterback. That's been a nice little duo between the two. Espinal had a rushing touchdown. Anthony Grazzino had a rushing touchdown. Amundsen had a touchdown. So you're seeing 5 different guys score a touchdown here, and it was impressive performance. But this Pearl River defense showing the grittiness and toughness, only allowing 7 points. And again, another couple. They played Pleasantville very well. You saw a couple now impressive wins as well defensively. If they can get that offensive line shaped together, Pearl River is a team that you should keep an eye on. They go to 2-1. Let's go to B matchup, Rhinebeck at Irvington. And Rhinebeck getting their 3rd victory. I'm not going back to the Rhinebeck history. This has been one of the better starts of the season for the last few years, winning 44-22. Now, the defense, they give up some big plays and some points here, but quarterback Merkel, 4 touchdowns in this one, 3 rushing, 1 passing, had 189 yards of total offense, also 9 tackles defensively. Schneider's another guy who's made some big plays for them. He had a touchdown reception. Look at Rhinebeck, again, going 3-1, making a big they play like 2 games in like 6 days or something, and they come out victorious. So a lot of kudos to Rhinebeck. Irvington drops to 0-3. Another very impressive performance in the Hudson Valley Football League. Peekskill at Portchester. Peekskill winning 38-0. And I tell you what, I've been impressed with Peekskill's defense, and they performed very well. This is, again, a rainy, ugly day, but they scored a bunch of points here, and this defense continues to impress. And now Peekskill goes to 2-1, and probably one of the bigger surprises here. We kind of seen a bunch of returning starters come in, some of the skill guys that they could potentially have. How would it all come together? It's been a pretty solid start for them. They took Spring Valley to the limit, and now they've had a couple impressive victories in a row. And finally, to wrap it all up, Hudson Valley Football League, Ramapo at Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie winning 20-14 in overtime. Poughkeepsie goes to 1-3. Ramapo drops to 0-3. Fabrice Adelson did throw an INT, had 75 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Linebacker Perez was active. Miche was also very active defensively. But Poughkeepsie, look at them making the big plays and big moments. It looked like Ramapo was going to try to come back here. They go into overtime, and Poughkeepsie makes enough plays to get their first victory. I believe the first victory for their new coach as well, so congratulations to Coach. All right, guys, that was it. I know it was a lot of games. We talk a lot of bit football. Always love talking with you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is Frank signing off. Peace out.